Okay, thank you very much for coming. Welcome, and I just want to go over the League's mission, which is it's a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. So to that end, we'll be presenting a program on election security, since that's on everyone's mind lately. And this is Jennifer, I'm Cindy Bell, I'm the president of the Mid-Hudson Region League. And this is Jennifer Clark, who is our vice president, also secretary of the state board, and she will be running the meeting from here on.
That makes me sound very important.
You are.
I don't know about that. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming again. We have gotten a lot of questions about election security. People have been concerned about, what's going on online. Are our voting machines connected there? What about these new electronic poll books? What's happening? You hear news stories about Russia and what's that all about? So we were asked to put on a program, and we decided that this would be completely in line with our mission because, as Cindy said, we're focused on participating in government, making sure everyone votes. And a very important part of that is making sure everyone's comfortable with voting and that they know it's secure. And if it's not secure, what actions can we take to help fix that? So today we have a wonderful panel to come and help answer some of these questions. We have Douglas Kellner, who is co-chair of the New York State Board of Elections. We have Mark Lindeman, who is Director of Science and Technology Policy at Verified Voting. And then we have two members from our local Board of Elections, Ashley Dittus, who's one of the commissioners there, and John Quigley, who's a deputy commissioner there. We figured we would start out with Doug to give us what's going on in New York State. Then we'll move to John and Ashley to talk about more local, what's going on here. And then we have Mark to give us kind of a broader picture of things. After they each do their speaking, they're each going to have a little bit to say. Then we're going to do a question and answer from the audience. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you guys. And Doug.
All right, well, thanks very much.
Is that on?
I don't know, let's see. That says on. Now it's on? Does that make a difference? Okay. Well, I'll start out with a little story on how important the League is in developing voting systems in New York. Now, you all remember that in 2000 there was this big uproar over the vote counting in Florida because Florida was using punch cards and the election was so close and there were lots of flaws in the ability to count punch card votes. And Congress, in its wisdom, enacted the Help America Vote Act 2 years later to try to address problems. One of those things that the Help America Vote Act did was not only ban punch cards, but also lever voting machines, because lever voting machines couldn't be used by voters with disabilities. And so New York had to implement the Help America Vote Act, and Governor Pataki set up a task force to view the different alternatives that New York could look at to decide how it should replace the lever voting machines. And the League of Women Voters had one seat on that task force. Amy Alud was designated by the League to sit on that task force. And I was also appointed on that task force by the leader of the Democratic Party. For years, I had been objecting to what we call black box voting, which was where the votes are counted in secret by the computer without any ability to verify whether the computer has accurately counted the votes. And But there was an assumption in 2002 that that's the system that New York was going to use. And Amy from the League came on with that same assumption. Indeed, the National League had gone on record saying we want to upgrade, in quotes, the voting system by using direct recording electronic voting machines that would have all these fancy bells and whistles. But Amy sat on that committee and listened carefully as those of us who were questioning black box voting laid out all the security problems, and Amy says, I've got to go back to the League and tell them about this. And she went back to the New York State League and reported, and the League in 2003 changed its view and said, no, we need a verifiable voting system. And coming from the League of Women Voters, that had dramatic impact on the New York law that was eventually passed in 2005 that brought about the current system that we have in New York. And so I just want to acknowledge that the role that an organization like the League of Women Voters plays is very, very important. I would add in New York City, they're just about the only ones who shed transparency on what the New York City Board of Elections does, which the fact that the League goes to every meeting of the City Board of Elections and reports on all the backroom deals that they observe and raises those questions really puts a damper on the inefficiencies that the New York City Board is often accused of. So again, I thank you all for coming and being interested in this. So then to get to the issue at hand, to describe the New York voting system, there are really three things that are important for security issues. One is the voting system itself, the other is the voter registration database, and then security issues for all the other systems that the Board of Elections uses. On the voting system itself, I'm proud to say that I think New York actually has the toughest and most comprehensive security regulations of any state in the country. A lot of people were railing against New York as the last state to go into compliance with the Help America Vote Act, which required replacing the lever voting machines. But as we went through that process, I always said, look, the goal isn't to be the first, the goal is to be the best. And I think that in general, New York has accomplished that with a secure system. And to just explain the details of why I think the New York system is superior. First of all, we have a rigorous certification process. The certification process is almost entirely open to the public in terms of reviewing the testing documents. There are only a very few areas in terms of security codes that we won't release. And the New York certification process is much more rigorous than the federal certification process. It includes an independent source code review and requires that the source code that runs the vote counting process be escrowed with the Board of Elections, so that if something goes wrong, you can go back and have access to that without having to go back to the vendor necessarily. The voting machines are not connected to the internet. The state law prohibits any wireless capacity for the voting systems. But New York goes one step further, and New York prohibits even the computer system that is used for the ballot setup to be connected to the internet. So, and And we have to enforce that occasionally. I'm aware of at least one instance where they found that workers at a county board of elections had downloaded video game software onto the computer that had been used for programming the ballot. And the sanction was that the county had to wipe all of their voting machines and those ballot setup computers and start over again from scratch. An expensive, time-consuming process that we think taught them a lesson, that, and hopefully the word is out that everybody knows that we're really serious, that you can't hook up to the internet for anything that's connected to the voting system. New York is the only state in the country that prohibits contracting out the ballot setup process. In a lot of places in the country, the local boards of elections hire the vendors to actually do the ballot setup. In New York, we say, no, you have to be a sworn officer of the Board of Elections in order to have access to the computer that does the ballot programming. And then the voting machines themselves, we have hand-marked paper ballots for the most part. Disabled voters can use a ballot marking device, but the ballot marking device only marks the ballot. It doesn't count the ballot. The voter still has a piece of paper that they can look at that goes into the ballot scanner. The scanner takes images of the ballot and stores those images in the memory of the machine and in 2 memory sticks that are removable from the machine. So that creates a record of the ballot image itself. And then New York has an audit process. In 2005, when the rule was adopted, it was the state of the art. And it is 3% of the machines selected randomly. Now, Professor Lindeman, sitting next to me, has come up with a more efficient system for doing the audit called risk-limiting audits. And New York has not yet adopted the risk-limiting audits. Also, on the flaw side is that there have been 2 adverse court decisions that have restricted verifiability of the ballots. One is that the court has said that both commissioners, both the Republican and the Democratic commissioners, have to agree that there was a discrepancy that escalates the audit. So, you know, in a general contest between the Republicans and the Democrats, one cannot expect that the commissioners are going to agree that an audit should be escalated. So in effect, they've rendered that a nullity. And one of the things that I've been pushing for the last few years is that the law should make it clear that where there is a very close contest, that there should be a manual count. Ulster County, to its credit, along with New York City and Columbia County, are the only 3 jurisdictions in New York State that have locally adopted rules to provide for manual counts in very close contests. I was very happy to see that Governor Cuomo this year came out in his State of the State message endorsing the concept of hand counts in close contests. And so maybe this year we'll finally get the legislation to correct that problem that came from that adverse decision of the New York Court of Appeals. The other adverse decision came in May of this year, where the Court of Appeals said that the ballot images that record the pictures of the voted ballots are covered by the same rules that apply to the original ballots themselves, where the law has said for more than 100 years that the original ballots can only be handled under supervision of the court by a court order. Now, for the last 10 years, New York City and about half the counties in the state had been allowing access to the recorded ballot images by the voting machine. But the Court of Appeals said, no, those are also confidential because they're copies of those confidential records. So I'm hopeful that we'll get legislation that will reverse that. And in my view, making the ballot images public is a very important step, both for giving the public confidence, because that means anybody can go and get the record of the ballot images and check the count themselves. And secondly, it will make it more efficient in the court process, because instead of having to go through a whole hand count in a close contest, the candidates and the lawyers can go do it themselves with the ballot images and say, wait a minute, here are the places where the machine miscounted the ballots. And well, I'm taking too much time, but I could say that the machines do knowingly miscount a very small number of ballots. So it's not that the machines are perfect, it's that it's a pretty small amount. And it's because of voter errors that the machines miscount. So in New York law, if the voter circles the election target instead of filling in the election target on the ballot, the law says that still counts as a vote because the voter's intent is clear. But the machine isn't going to see that circle around the voting target because the machine's only looking at the voting target. So the machine isn't going to count that vote. Also, New York law says that if you put an identifying mark on the ballot, if you sign the ballot, that invalidates the whole ballot. But again, the machine isn't going to see that identifying mark on the ballot because it's outside of the voting target. So the machine has done what it's programmed to do, but those votes are not accurately counted. And in a close contest, that could make a difference. Well, I think, I could come back to some of the other issues about the voter registration database and national security issues, but I think we'll let the others talk, and then we can always come back to that if you want.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. This one's battery's dead. All right. Well, so we just heard everything, so we can go home for the evening. My experience at the Board of Elections, I've been working for Ulster County Board of Election as the Deputy Commissioner for only 6 months now. And when I sit out and I see you guys sitting here with your concerns and hopefully a lot of questions, you bring a new perspective, and that's something that I have tried to bring to the Board of Elections in my past 6 months. I've experienced a lot of firsts working for the Ulster County Board of Elections, and I believe there are a lot of firsts for Ashley as well, and this is where our dynamic actually works very well, because she's got the experience, and I'm the one asking why 24/7 as to why are we doing it this way. We had a first with using electronic poll pads. We had a first this year with early voting. We had a first this year with a manual recount, in which there were a lot of questions as to the integrity of the election and how we can uphold everything to be to the highest standards as we just discussed. Besides going into too many details as to how the ballot actually gets cast, how it works through the BMD machines, there's a lot of measures in place that protect your vote, and most of the concerns come down to user error. How do we get more people, human error I should say, how do we get more humans to basically contribute and actually participate in the process from being poll workers, because the quality of the poll worker does actually lead to a security concern. We do need you to make sure that we have people who are capable of working these new poll pads. We do need you to make sure that you're filling out the ballot correctly. I believe in our manual recount, we might have found 2 ballots this year that were just filled out either differently or casted twice that we had to correct, but that shows you the accuracy of these BMD machines and its ability to try and help correct human error, but we play a large role in how this process plays out, and we have to make sure that we participate to make sure it's held accountable.
Yeah, for the local boards, all the regulations that our legislators pass, we're responsible for implementing that in a real capacity. So we have very vigorous testing standards. We program and test those ballots to the highest degree. And then the physical security of the voting systems is something that we take great measures. We have very in-depth security plans that we test before the election. We make sure that things are going to play out in the real scenario, because when the election events are live and ongoing, the ballots are live and they're out there, and we have to make sure that they are completely accurate, that the voters are engaging with a voting system that is going to record their ballot properly. So we take a lot of steps. We work in a bipartisan fashion, so everything is done in that Democrat-Republican split, and we work together all day long. We've done extra measures that are beyond the scope of what the law has asked. For example, when we upload our results on election night, that secure server that holds all of the memory card devices that come out of the voting system that have the actual results on them, well, we have to make sure that those never have any cross-contamination with the computer that is putting it on the internet, on our website, and also sending it up to the State Board of Elections. So we invest in brand new memory flash drives, and for every upload that we upload to those online computers, it's a brand new stick. So it never has that cross-contamination. We air gap the system, and that's really important, because if a malicious actor were to put a line of code and hide it and embed it on the computer that is wired, that could potentially go into that secure server. And as Doug illustrated before, it is very difficult and costly to clean that and make sure that that is then has the integrity again. And when we have election night reporting, folks are very invested in knowing who won that night. They want to know. They want to make sure that the website is able to load. We had some issues this year with that, which caused a lot of confusion for voters. It was very challenging, because we work in tandem with our county information services department, and they wanted to give us a brand new website. It was great. All through early voting, people were able to use it as a resource, but when it came for time to get all the results on election night, there was an issue. It kept crashing. They didn't have enough memory given how many people were trying to access the site that night. So it continuously crashed. It was a nightmare. And then on top of it, one of our staff members had a medical event, and we were forced to close early. We still had some cards to read. Two of the inspectors in Shongum, which is all the way in the southern end of the county, had left 2 of the memory cards in the voting system, which we weren't even able to access until the next day. So there was lots of confusion. And then we had never uploaded results for early voting before. So combining those results from election day plus the 9 days of early voting resulted in a back-end coding error where the totals matched for the candidates, but what party those votes were on was miscoded. So we had to fix that 2 days after the election, which then opened up a new can of worms where people were questioning the vote counts. On top of it, with the close election that we had, the DA's race, that was shining a light on that whole process, and lots of lessons were learned. We had lots of discussions with both our county IS department, folks up in State Board of Elections. So It was not an ideal scenario, but we definitely learned a lot from it. But we do take everything very seriously with security. I brought all of our plans today, if anybody wants to look at them. It's all public, anybody can access our security plans. When we test our ballots, we invite the candidates, the public is able to come. We lift the curtain on all of our processes. There's nothing that is secret about what we do. Anybody can pop in and ask us as many questions as they want, and we're happy to be here today to answer your questions, and that's all right though. Anything else, John?
Can you speak a little bit about the physical security of the voting machines and what we do in Ulster County?
Absolutely. We have a warehouse that is completely secure. It has all kinds of alarm systems. The voting systems, when they have all of their memory cards in them, there's a variety of tamper-evident seals and labels that are verified by the election inspectors in the morning of the election to make sure that in between delivering the voting systems and when the polls open, that nothing was tampered with. We also do that every night of early voting. That was a new challenge for us, was figuring out, well, these voting systems are going to stay in that early voting center overnight with voted ballots inside of them. How do we secure those on a nightly basis to make sure that nothing happened? So we developed a very intense security plan, submitted that to the state for approval. All the county boards had to do the same, and ours was very in-depth, I thought. Maybe.
And yours got approved.
And it was approved.
Maybe about half
On the
of
first
that
try,
rejected,
right?
Yeah, on the first try, we were approved.
I would just conclude by saying, if there was, I know it's my first year, but I think Ashley will vouch for this, if there was any year to test the integrity of the Ulster County's process, election process, this was the year to test it, and no matter how many times we had to overcome an obstacle, we had a backup plan to the backup plan to the backup plan to make sure that there was never an opportunity to lose a vote or question the integrity of the election.
John, can you speak to poll pad security?
Poll pads. The poll pads are essential, is just the poll book itself. When we talk about keeping that separate, that stays separate from everything else. It has no interaction with our actual database that maintains voter registration. So at the time that we get these poll pads ready to be deployed to the poll sites, what we have to do is export from our database that we are maintaining separately from what is known to us as ePulse. It's our managing platform for the voter registration when you sign in. And then we have to upload that directly to the poll pads. And there actually is a syncing process that takes place to keep them up to date, especially for early voting, so that no individual votes twice. That's why one of the requirements put forth by the state is that all early voting sites do have an internet connection. And the way we went about doing so with these poll pads is we made sure that we use Verizon Wireless rather than a local Wi-Fi at a library, for example, because there is potential for that local Wi-Fi to have the ability to have other devices on the network that try and access your poll pads. And that's where a question could arise. So we removed that possibility by going straight to Verizon's network. It is very difficult to replicate your exact phone number and access the information on your cell phone. So essentially that's how you have to think of these poll pads, is they each have their own phone number, and that's the whole basically wireless protocol for our phones is 10 times more secure than a wireless network that we have in our library. So any potential for getting into those poll pads is pretty much close to impossible.
And we also had
It's possible
paper
to go
backups,
into
too.
depth as to how. You have to really want to target and go after the voter database and put a lot of time, money, and resource into doing so in order to get into the poll pads.
Yeah, it's hard, but not impossible.
Correct.
But
Exactly.
also, it's only the voter database, it's not the
Correct.
voting system.
At no point is your ballot there.
Which pad does Ulster use?
We are
No
using
ink.
no ink.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that get your approval?
Well, they all have to be.
Sure.
I know.
All right, Mark, you want to give us us a broader look at things.
Am I live? No, I'm live. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, hi. If my face maybe seems vaguely familiar to some of you, I'm local. I live about a mile away. I have since 2002. But these days I'm also national. I just got back from Tallahassee, and if I look somewhat as if I've been clubbed in the face, well, it could be I haven't quite recovered from the last round of plane flights, so I apologize for that. So I work with Verified Voting, which was founded by computer scientists around the turn of the century in response to what Kellner referred to earlier, the spread of paperless black box voting machines, where if there were any questions about whether the machines had been subverted, there was really absolutely no way to know. So Verified Voting advocates for responsible use of technology in elections, and in the context of voting, a really good technology is paper. It's hard to subvert a lot of paper all at once, short of taking an entire box and throwing it in the river, that kind of thing. And a little more specifically, we support what I think of as the verification bridge. So we want votes recorded on paper ballots where voters have verified exactly what's on those paper ballots, and then at least some of those paper ballots are audited or verified on the back end. And if necessary, in the closest contests, they're all manually recounted. Ashley Dittus was talking earlier about the questions that arose about the Ulster County election. I take great satisfaction in knowing that the votes in Ulster County were recorded in a trustworthy fashion, that they were protected, that they were, every single ballot in this particular election was scrutinized. It's very important for all of us as citizens to be cautious, to be concerned, but not to panic when things go wrong. In elections, there will always be things that go wrong. We should not, any of us, be crying fraud when we hear that something went wrong. We should not be crying fraud when we hear about anomalies, okay? We need to look for the facts, we need to wait for the facts, but we need to give our election officials a chance to make things right. So that's something that I feel very passionate about, and it's part of the reason I'm in this field. What I like about audits is that not only is it true that if someone has subverted the machines, that mistake can be, or perhaps not mistake, can be corrected, but that if things have basically gone right, we end up with direct evidence that that's true. So we're ending up with evidence-based elections. We're not relying on processes. We're not relying on people. So that's our vision of how things ought to be. Just to talk briefly about national trends, as Doug said back in 2002, 03, 04, it looked like paperless voting machines were going to sweep the country. I like to think partly because of the work of Verified Voting, although I take no personal credit for it, and advocates like Doug Kellner, who has been extremely influential first in New York City and now in New York State, and similar people, both in government and citizen advocates all over the country. The tide really has turned. In this election, about 70% of registered voters are in jurisdictions where most voters will be voting on hand-marked paper ballots. I believe about 17%. Frankly, it's surprisingly, shockingly, terrifyingly perhaps, some jurisdictions aren't entirely sure what voting system they'll be using this November. But upon information and belief, about 17% will be voting on ballot marking devices, and their votes will be recorded separately. So that raises some concerns, but at least there is a paper record that voters absolutely can verify. The remaining voters will be using direct recording electronic systems. Some of those have a paper record that typically is harder for voters to verify, but not impossible. And still a handful will be voting on systems that are completely unverifiable, which I regret. But New York is the entire state of New York, at least for the time being, is in a really good place on that. So we should all be encouraged. As an outcome of the 2016 presidential election, and all the news stories and all the controversy, I wish I could say that partisanship has been swept aside. Not altogether, not altogether. But there is some degree of bipartisan consensus, yes, even in U.S. Congress, that there is a shared national problem that needs to be addressed. So in response to that, as you may have heard, there have been new lines of funding, hundreds of millions of dollars made available. I think Doug said before that, what's our share, 21 million?
21 of federal million of
Yes.
money, and it has to be matched by the state. So by the time all the arithmetic is done, it'll be 27 million. And that's big money because the annual budget of the State Board of Elections is only about 6 million a year. Ashley, what's your budget?
A little over 1.
No. So the federal money is significant.
Yeah.
Yeah, the problem, but the issue, the long-term consideration is we can't have big infusions of cash every 18 years or so. That doesn't work. So it's on all of you and all of us to advocate for steady federal funding and state funding, of course, year after year after year to make our elections work. I happen to be good friends with Cami Foote, who runs elections in Inyo County, California. She got $10,000 in federal funding. She runs a very small office, but no matter how small your election is, there's not much you can do with $10,000. She's like a school teacher. She's paying for a lot of fundamental election security out of her own pocket because that's how she feels about it. In my experience, and I do want to say this, I work primarily on advocating post-election audits and piloting the risk-limiting audits that Doug referred to. I work with Democratic and Republican and independent local election officials all over the country. For the most part, I cannot tell the partisan affiliation of the people I work with. They are laser-focused on making our elections work as well as they possibly can. So we all, I think, can be greatly encouraged by that. I want to stop, but are there other topics I should be sure to touch on before we open it up?
No, I think we're good. I am going to steal one of these mics, though, so we can get the questions. So it's only one's working there, I'm going to take one from over here. All right, questions, yes.
Hi, my name is Rose Quinn. I'm a Kingston resident. I got this letter last week basically saying that my vote was stolen from me. I went to vote at what I thought was my polling station. It was changed, unbeknownst to me. I was told at that point that my best option, since I was running late for work and trying to catch a bus, was to use an affidavit. And apparently, that affidavit wasn't valid because I wasn't at my polling station, which is unconscionable to me. It's very disturbing. And I'd like to tell you this is the first time I feel as though my vote's been tampered with, because that's really what I feel like right now. I was already kind of on the cusp of feeling like this whole process is pretty jaded, and now I really feel that way. The last time I tried to vote, I was certain that I had changed my address, and because I had moved from New Paltz, in fact my whole family, because I had my disabled sister and my niece with me, all trying to vote in the Delgado election. We went to what we were told was our polling station at the Everett Hyde. We were told we couldn't be found, and I had to get my disabled sister into a car. We had to get onto the computer. We had to make phone calls ourselves and figure out that we were actually still back in New Paltz. And I had to get in the car with my disabled sister and go back to New Paltz to get my vote in that time. Well, this is insane to me. I mean, this is insane. I voted. I voted in what I thought was a fair, legal fashion. I didn't do anything that was out of calling, and my vote got taken from me. In this election, of all elections, my vote got taken from me. That's a problem. This is a very serious problem, what happened here. So that's all I have to say. I mean, I'm perfectly willing to submit this as evidence that my vote was stolen from me.
To follow up on that, would one of you speak a little bit about affidavit ballots and how they work?
Well, let me just start by saying off 2 points on this. That the law, as it exists now, with respect to your vote, is that you have to go to the correct polling place where you reside on election day, or your vote will not count. Now, the law says that the inspector was supposed to tell you that, to say you're at the wrong polling place, here's where you're supposed to go, and the inspector is required to give you an affidavit ballot if you ask for it in that instance, but they're supposed to tell you that if you're at the wrong polling place, your ballot won't count. So that's one point. And the second point is that when you moved from New Paltz and you went to your to the polling place where you then lived, the inspector should have given you an affidavit ballot, and the affidavit ballot would have counted because that's where you now live. When you went back to New Paltz, you actually committed technically a crime by voting at a place where you didn't live. All right, now that's the state of New York law, okay? Many people have been advocating for a bill that says that in that case where you go to the wrong poll site, that the vote should count for any contests that you would have been eligible to vote for. And so County DA would have been one of them, and you're right, your vote makes a difference in a close contest like that. So that's one issue. And we also want to congratulate your Ulster County Board of Elections because they did provide for countywide early voting. And not everybody in the state did that. So Ulster was one step ahead of the curve that you could go to any place for early voting and have a valid vote. Ideally, that ought to be the case down the road statewide, that you could go to any polling place in the state and get the correct ballot for where you live and have that vote count. All right.
So this speaks to the question of why the polling places have been changed every year. You live in New Paltz and it got changed again, and if you're at a polling place, then people get there and it turns out that that's not the right place. So there seems to be a lot of changes, and I hear there's going to be more changes coming up in the coming 2020. So maybe someone can speak to why the changes are happening. It feels very political for some reason.
By and large, our poll sites do not change. New Paltz has been a town where we've had difficulties. We are at the behest of the owners of those buildings. Specifically, we had issues where the schools, and this is a trend statewide, schools do not want to be poll sites. Under the existing laws, they have to afford us rooms in their buildings because they receive taxpayer dollars, etc. But there is lots of efforts on the part of the school districts to not have voting occur within their building, specifically when there are students in the building at the same time. There is a lot of anxiety over safety for the students. There's been an uprise in events at schools with shootings and things like that, and they're very anxious about opening the doors to the public when those students are on campus. New Paltz we've had a lot of discussions with the superintendent of New Paltz. They did give us space in their buildings in 2019. We expect that will continue in 2020. I don't anticipate any changes in New Paltz for the general election. It's when we have the primary elections where they do not have a school closed that day. We do extend to them security in the form of the sheriff's department. We've paid for sheriff's deputies to be on site during those school hours in those elementary schools, the middle school and the high school. I don't expect a lot of changes. I think that those issues have been resolved for the most part. But when we do change a poll site, it is a requirement of us to send notice to all of those registered voters in those election districts that are impacted by that poll site change, which we always do. There's always a postcard that is sent, and then we do advertisements in the form of legal notices in all of the newspapers. So we do what is prescribed to us to inform the voters that those changes occur. It is just a nature of how we do voting in New York State, having the use of poll sites. We are at the behest of the owners of those buildings, the firehouses, the schools, community centers, etc. We compensate them. We ask for their hospitality every year, and we work that out early in the year. So we have to figure out all of our poll sites in March. On March 16th, we have to figure out all the poll sites for the rest of the year. So that's something that we have to consciously think about before we get close to those election events, so that we can have the time to inform the public of where they're going to vote. And now with our early voting sites and our centers, I think we've made it a little bit easier for folks to get access to the ballot box. They can vote early for those 9 days. And I'm proud that we have had such a vigorous early voting program. 7 sites, anybody could go to any site, and we had the second highest turnout per capita for early voting in the whole state, next to Columbia County. So the Hudson Valley, by and large, did really well with early voting, and we just hope that more people utilize that in 2020 and going forward.
Go ahead.
And just to speak to the verification of like your voter status and where you might be voting, we send out mail check cards once a year, and I mean, this could be possibly a flaw where if you moved and you didn't receive that mail check card, you're not going to think in the year, did I get a mail check card to say that I'm still registered to vote here? It's probably something we can do a bit better at, communicating with people, saying, hey, this is the time of year where we're going to be sending out a mail check card. Please expect to be receiving it in the mail. And that way you at least are a little bit more aware of us trying to verify you as a voter still do live at your address.
And people can verify their status online.
Yes.
And
On
get
our
poll
website.
site.
But
the
I'm
state's
sorry, but I
website.
did do that, and it said the Everett Hodge, and then it got changed to the church on Albany Avenue.
Did you do a last minute?
I did it, I didn't do it for the last election, I
Everett Hodge
looked it
has been
up,
a
and they
site
said that's
for
it. In fact, a representative looked it up for me,
It,
and told me it was the Everett Hodge.
Huh.
And I never received, it's funny because one other person in my household did receive a postcard saying things got switched. So she went to the right polling site. I did not.
yours is definitely a scenario that afterwards I'd love to.
You know, we have to do research on it.
Yeah.
It could have been that you were still in new polls.
Yeah.
I don't know, we only send the cards to the folks that
I've been in Kingston
are
for
active,
like-
registered, but Everett Hodge has not changed. That's not, we
Yeah.
have not had any poll site changes in the city of Kingston since we changed sites for Midtown, but that was quite a few years ago. That's
Over
it's not a
3
new
years, 4
change.
years ago.
Yeah, there were no changes in New Paltz or in Kingston.
Could one of you or more of you speak to the process of absentee voting? Because that seems to me still a system that's very ripe for abuse, and I know there was a big case in, I can't remember, one of the southern states where it was very much being abused.
Well, this is my, a topic that I talk about quite a bit because this is where I depart from the mainstream of the good government groups and democratic voting advocates because I say that extending no excuse absentee voting or voting by mail, we can increase the voter turnout to 110% based on New York history. That, in my experience as an election lawyer and then subsequently as election commissioners, almost all of the fraud that occurs in elections is in the absentee voting process. Now, right now, absentee ballots are between 3 and 4% of the ballots cast in New York State. It's significant. There are reasons that I think that people should be allowed to vote absentee. If you're unable to get to the polls because you're disabled or because you're going to be out of town, yeah, then absentee voting should be available for you, and that's the reason that it was set up. It started during the Civil War when they were concerned that 10% of the electorate was in the Union Army and not going to be able to vote in the election, and so they allowed soldiers to cast their votes by absentee ballots. Now, I could go into all of the problems with potential fraud in the absentee ballot process. Essentially, you're making the post office part of your election machinery. And you're eliminating the ability to verify that the ballot is being cast independently because it's not being done in person. So, I am very hesitant to extend absentee balloting in or vote by mail in an unlimited fashion. On the other hand, you have to look at the trend. You have, especially in the far west now, Oregon and Washington State are 100% vote by mail. California now, it's well over 50% are vote by mail. Colorado has gone to a system where Colorado automatically mails out a ballot to every voter, and it's up to the voter whether they want to return it in person or whether to mail it back in or leave it in one of the various pickup boxes that they have. But I think that if you really care about election integrity, there are so many different points for potential abuses. And, you know, I could say, coming back from my start as in the Tammany Democratic system in New York City, that those abuses are inevitable. But it's not just New York City. We've seen abuses in the Rensselaer city elections 4 years ago, and abuses in other jurisdictions throughout the state of the mail-in voting process. So, I just urge the League to carefully examine all of those security issues related to having vote by mail or vote at home, or all the different ways that you call extending absentee voting.
Ashley can attack me now from that.
We have a lot of issues with candidates who harvest ballots for themselves through the absentee process. They have the right to do so. They're protected under the law. There's a section of the absentee where you can designate someone to facilitate that ballot issuing for you as the voter. So we have quite a few candidates, it's particularly in the local elections, who come to the board. They have a stack of absentee ballot applications, and we give them the ballots for those voters that have applied to have the ballot delivered to that person. It becomes quite an issue for us because we have a status for absentee voters that can apply and have a permanent status. So they will get a ballot for every election that they're entitled for. Well, if you designate candidate Joe Doe as your ballot delivery courier, that candidate only cares about their election that they're running in. They're not going to come and fetch your presidential absentee ballot this year if you're a permanent absentee voter. So we have to send those voters information. We send them a letter. We ask them, do you still want this person to deliver it for you? Particularly when we know that it's a candidate who goes and collects upwards of 100 ballots for their area that they're running in. Other boards have tried to put a limit on how many ballots that a person can facilitate this delivery method through, and they've been sued and they've lost those lawsuits. So we contemplated doing something of that nature, but then we heard Albany County had gone through a similar lawsuit, so we decided not to. I would love to see legislation on the state level passed to limit in some capacity the amount of ballots that a candidate specifically can get through the absentee process. I'm sure it would be challenged in court, but It's a practice that gives me a lot of pause as a commissioner when I have a candidate who has received themselves over 100 ballots, brought those ballots to those voters, voting the ballot. I'm suspicious of them voting the ballot with the voter and then bringing them back. I feel like it's a bit intimidating to have a person in that scenario voting side by side with a candidate who's on the ballot, but they are allowed to do it under the law, and it's something that I feel strongly about changing.
Local elections is where you're going to see the most, without actually looking up numbers, which we probably could do. I'd say probably 4 candidates carried over 125 absentees to bring in.
Each.
Yeah.
Does Ulster have an active program for nursing home
We
absentees?
do. Yes, we go to all the nursing homes ourselves and vote in a bipartisan fashion with those residents of those facilities.
At the moment, I think we have 11 nursing homes with over 300 permanently voting absentee via that process, if not more, from those 11. And at times, you'll even get new people when we go there to register on spot.
We're looking to add a couple more facilities this year that we just found out are expanding. So we do that, and we do that in the same fashion that we do everything. One Democrat, one Republican.
Hi. I want to thank Commissioner Dittus for her responses to my questions that I have posed in the past. I have 2 additional questions. One is you said that there would be 2 primaries for Ulster County when there was a law passed in New York State that the primaries would be consolidated. That's one question. The second one, are we still using the same scanners for the next election? We're not switching over to the Express Excel machines. And the third question is, I need a clarification about this absentee ballot, about, the candidates abusing that, because if you wanted to vote absentee, you have to put in an application. And after you do the application, then the ballot gets sent to the person. So you're saying that the candidates would have the person designate them as the pickup person for those ballots?
Yes, that's part of the application. You don't have to have it mailed to you. You can have it delivered to you in person at the Board of Elections, either through yourself being there, which quite a few people do, or there's a spot where you can put somebody's name. And it's typically used for scenarios like, oh, my wife is in labor, she's having a baby, I'm going to go and get her ballot for her. Not so much, I'm a candidate and I'm going to go back and forth and deliver tens of ballots. We are using our same scanners. We're not looking into upgrading the scanners this year. We do anticipate that we will eventually have to, because the scanners that we deployed, the ImageCast scanners by Dominion, they are not making them anymore. So we'll have to eventually look into new scanners. We programmed our early voting scanners to facilitate all of our 163 election districts, and we're very happy that that whole process worked. There was some question whether or not they would have the ability to have that much capacity, and they did. And then, sorry, what was your first? Oh, why there's 2 primaries? Yeah. There's a presidential primary, so that's always treated separately. So every 4 years, there will be 2 primaries. This year, there's a primary on April 28th and then June 23rd for the regular state and local primary.
And if we end up with a federal one in June as well.
And federal, yes. Those are our offices up this year.
I also want to thank you, Ashley, for the work, and thank you, John, all of you, really, thank you, but especially as an Ulster County resident. I received a notice from Common Cause about the Express Vote XL voting machines, and I'm just wondering where that stands in the state of New York, what your opinions are about its viability as a voting tool.
You want to go first, Mark?
Well, I can't necessarily speak to the circumstance in New York. I think I understand why New York City is interested in these systems. I can imagine a couple of reasons. One has to do with ability to support multiple languages, and another has to do with the ability to readily support early voting. Here in Ulster, of course, there was early voting. I had to try it. It worked great. And so my ballot was being printed on demand, and that seemed to work flawlessly. Doug can fact check me on this. I believe that there were some people in the last election in New York City who were voting on 48-inch long perforated ballots. I don't know how you do that through ballot on demand. I certainly don't know how you make every 48-inch perforated ballot available for every ballot style in the city of New York. I think that whether it be New York City or any place else in the state or really the country, the Express Vote XL is not how I would go about solving the problem. That's not how verified voting would go about solving any problem. And our great concern about the Express Vote XL is you put in a ballot card, it has various names, sort of off to the side. You mark your choices on a very large, expensive touchscreen, and at the end, the ballot card is printed with your selections. You may or may not look at those selections. You may or may not be able to read those selections. If you're a voter with disabilities, you do not have direct visual access to that. So whatever reader you might use to tell what is on your ballot or whatever it might be, that's not available to you. So we're terribly concerned about the verification properties of these ballots. To me, so verified voting's position, which is also my position, is that this technology is not appropriate for use by all voters, at least until we figure out how to enable all voters to verify their ballots. And with the XL, I don't even know how to go about doing that. So I'm aligned with Common Cause New York on that issue, as is my organization.
And where does New York stand on certifying?
Right. So it's in the certification process now. The public testing part of the certification process took place on Tuesday of last week, which is why Common Cause issued their press release and their letter. There are 4 possible outcomes. One outcome is that the experts who do the independent testing and the source code review will find that there's a problem and the system will get rejected. Another possibility is that and ultimately it's the commissioners, I shouldn't just lay it off on the experts, but it's pretty hard for the commissioners not to follow the expert reports, because if the machine meets the very tough standards under New York law, the commissioners have an obligation to certify it, because our role is to determine whether or not it meets the security standards of the statute. All right, so one possibility is that the experts will say it doesn't meet the standard and it'll get rejected. A second possibility is that it will be rejected as a vote counting machine, but will be allowed to be used as a ballot marking device. And I might add that that's a very expensive pencil. But that is a possibility. And a third possibility is that it will be certified for all purposes. But the fourth possibility is that even if it's certified, that the counties won't buy it, because it's still up to the counties to decide whether or not they want to buy it. As Mark pointed out, New York City is under a lot of pressure because the current system that they have for the ballot marking devices has very limited memory options. and therefore it's not suitable for county-wide early voting. And that's why New York City is using those ballot marking device limitations as the excuse on why early voters have to go to their assigned early voting space instead of being able to go to any place in the county. So, there are issues, policy issues pushing that. And I would love to see an upgrade of the ballot marking device with greater memory capabilities so that they don't have to use the express vote as an ultra expensive method of just marking a ballot.
Hi, I'm Joe. A couple of points. Just to put it another side on the absentee ballot, as a long-term campaign worker, we do offer absentee ballots, but at least in my experience, limited, we try to really assure that we are not impacting or influencing any voting. It really is from a perspective of wanting to get the vote out. So having said that, I'm curious if you could embellish just a little bit. How deep was or how large was the impact on the 2016 election of the Russian-Ukraine guy in the room influence on the election of 2016, and what can we expect in 2020 as far as quote-unquote hacking or influencing?
The fact of efforts to probe and hack into the system is very well demonstrated, and New York experienced that as well in terms of attempts to access our voter registration database system. But the voter registration database system in New York is on a separate virtual private network that the state manages and has a fairly high level of security, but I wouldn't suggest that it's impenetrable. The threat to the voter registration database is that if voter registrations are changed or altered so that people then have trouble voting, that impacts turnout. There are some people who think that may have happened in North Carolina, where it may be coincidence, maybe not, but there was one vendor, VR Systems, that actually was penetrated and hacked through a phishing system, and that vendor was also the vendor for is it Durham, North Carolina, where the voter registration lists were completely fouled up, and that's so a very large disproportionate number of minority voters were unable to vote originally during the day, and it had an impact on depressing voter turnout. So that's one part of is just the integrity of the computer system itself, that we need to be vigilant about it. But the other side is the effect on the media, on social media, and disinformation and media campaigns, campaign finance spending, and that's a whole separate issue that's also very real, and there are lots of complex issues in trying to how to address that.
And just to add to that, we have essentially two or more ways of making sure that we have the original voter registration information for each individual. So if any one way was to be penetrated, there are backups to be able to take that information and upload it to the poll pads. Now, that would be one of the future places to be concerned about is the poll pad itself going to be vulnerable to an attack? And I think that's yet to be seen. I know we just had a conference call with Knowink, and they are actively putting in more updates through the state that they have to get approval for to make sure that their system is even more secure than it currently is.
Thank you.
If I might. So I think probably the best understood impact of hacking in 2016, which is not very well understood, actually just has to do with the political impact of the Democratic National Committee hack, nothing to do with election security per se. On election security, I think the clearest impact was to public confidence. Look, this is the new normal. After every election, there will be people who are absolutely convinced that an election was stolen, and there will, you can be confident, be forces who are not acting in our best interests who try to convince us of this. This is the new normal. And it's why one of my very first comments was to let your vigilance be balanced vigilance and don't believe everything you hear. The 2016 election came down to Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Wisconsin and Michigan had very substantial recounts. There's actually pretty good reason to believe that those votes were correctly recorded and correctly counted. There's not the kind of evidence I would like to see. We're still working on that. I'm going to be spending a lot of time in Michigan. Wisconsin has improved its post-election audits. You know, we're on it. Pennsylvania, most voters in Pennsylvania in 2016 voted on paperless systems. Pennsylvania's on it. Chances are that in 2020, everyone will be voting on some kind of paper system. Unfortunately, some of those will be Express Vote XLs and other ballot marking devices, which are not the ideal. But the progress is maybe not night and day, but very, very substantial. So I think that election officials are taking a lot of the right lessons from the 2016 election, and there's a lot to be encouraged about, my sincere opinion.
Thank you.
So now that our signatures are digitized and our votes are being digitized, what's to stop somebody from taking the two lists and figuring out how somebody voted? Like, how do you make sure that people's votes stay anonymous?
The scanners are programmed in such a way that you cannot tie any particular ballot to the time when the ballot goes through the scanner. And of course, there's no you're not allowed to make an identifying mark on the ballot. So, and the images are randomly stored in the memory. So ballot 1 goes in, then ballot 2 goes in, ballot 3 goes in. When ballot 4 goes in, you don't know what order it's going to get put on the memory disk, and it doesn't. And there's no way to track back the time when that ballot was made. So that's how the ballots remain anonymous. I could get to one other thing, though, that you mentioned, as we advance our technology. Voter registration only started in the middle of the 19th century. I think in Ulster County it didn't go into effect until 1894 or something like that. The signature was the best biometric identification that they had at the time. For 20 years now, I've been advocating the radical position that New York should abolish voter registration, just like North Dakota, and that When you vote, you would have to give your name and address, and you do a fingerprint. And that would be the identification to guarantee that people aren't voting twice. The technology is very inexpensive. My own laptop, that's how I turn on my laptop, is by my fingerprint. I realize that there are many privacy advocates out there who are saying, no, we don't want the government to have our fingerprint, but that now, to me, is the technological level of biometric identification, and it's a lot more secure than a signature in terms of identifying people. And then we can abolish voter registration. That would save New York State more than $50 million a year. And it isn't unprecedented. As I say, in North Dakota, they don't have voter registration. The advocates turned around. I first advocated this in 2002. The advocates have been turning around and calling it universal voter registration, which means everybody is registered to vote. Or my colleague at the State Board of Elections, Andrew Spano, says your birth certificate is your voter registration form.
How likely is that in New York State?
Yeah.
Zero. But if the league started advocating it, it might go up a little bit. But I've been, for those who want to listen, I've said that 2002 is when I first had the courage to say that publicly. And I still repeat it out there, so at least people think about it. Do we really, right now, the governor, all the leaders, all the Democratic leaders in the legislature have been saying that we want to have automatic voter registration, okay, which is a little different from universal voter registration, but the devil is in the details. And I acknowledge that all of these people of good faith in the governor's office, in the assembly, in the Senate, and the good government groups who are also advocating this can't get on the same page as to the details of how this automatic voter registration system will work. It's also expensive to implement. The costs of to do the DMV registration system, which was the very first thing Governor Cuomo did on his first day of office. He announced he was going to set up this voter registration system. I give him a lot of credit. Initially, he did it over Republican objections, but he was willing to fund it out of the DMV budget, and it got done. And eventually everybody agreed with it. But it cost $1.5 million in order to put it in place. And it took 2 years to do all the paperwork. And Ashley and John can talk about how complicated it is for them to deal with, although it's probably better than what was there before. All I'm saying is that there are a lot of details in getting everybody on the same page for a complicated administrative procedure to have automatic voter registration. And my answer is just get rid of voter registration, and it's not that complicated then.
Excuse me, can you say is it just the privacy issue that is stopping people, or is it political?
Well, everything is political when it comes to voting. So yes, but no, think about it. The ACLU will go nuts to say that you have to give a fingerprint in order to be allowed to vote. And I think that there are a portion of judges who might actually agree with them. On the other hand, I say, what's wrong with identifying yourself to vote? And I might add that in many places around the world, you have to do a fingerprint to vote. In many places around the world, they put an indelible mark on you when you voted so that you can't vote twice. So, it's not unprecedented. All right, well, I just throw it out there. I know it has no chance of being adopted soon, but if people like yourselves think about it and agree with me, well, maybe it will go somewhere someday.
First time I'm hearing that.
Any other questions?
You all spoke earlier about we should advocate for these changes. In what way who should we contact? What do you recommend as best avenues for doing so?
January is always the time of year to look to any of our elected representatives, especially in Albany. That's when they sort of kick off the new year with a lot of different proposals. I don't know how many different pieces of legislation have already passed in the past.
Well, last year, 54.
Yeah.
Which was a record, at least a recent record, that there were a very substantial number of changes in the election law.
I walked in thinking I knew election law, and then last year happened, and everything changed.
But they're not finished.
And they're not finished. As to whichever specific initiative it is that you're trying to support, there's a lot of different opportunities just talking to your state representative as to where they stand on that issue and where it is in the process. Fortunately, you can go online, see the status of the bills, where they are at in committee, and stuff like that, just by searching keywords that you're looking for.
Well, and you may want to talk about the League's process, because the League really does have a significant role in the state legislation affecting election law, that the legislators will consult with the League's representatives, and they don't necessarily do everything the League wants, they don't necessarily do everything that the Board of Elections wants, but the League is a player in Albany.
Yeah, so just so you know what the League does, or how the League is active, we're active at multiple layers of government. We have the local level, which is our county, towns, city, and that's really what our local League focuses a lot on. So we try to get out the word when there are things that are going to impact us locally. Local laws we need to be concerned about, or local laws we want to support. I know recently we had a campaign finance law that it's actually currently being considered by our legislature. We put on programs about that, we meet with the legislators about that, and we go to the meetings and we discuss this. We have a seat at the table. On the state level, our local league is also works with our representatives in the Senate there and the Assembly. They typically come home in February for a February break, and that's when we meet with them annually to set out what the League's goals are, what bills that we're supporting, and we try to push them in the direction that we want to go. Nationally, I'm not as informed because I'm not on the board for the national, but they do the same thing at the federal level. They meet with the federal representatives. We do a lot of lobbying. We do have staff lobbyists in national. In state, we have a person designated to go to the Senate and the Assembly, go to their meetings, and is basically a lobbyist. So we are also involved when there are bills related to election. We are frequently invited to come and testify. We have experts come and do that. We put together papers that we put out, and we send out a ton of emails, and I apologize if you're getting inundated with them, because there's a lot going on, and we have a lot of exciting stuff coming up with election law that we want to work for. Cindy?
We actually have a lobby day every year where groups of people just go up to Albany and meet with the representatives and lobby for, whatever we're doing that year. That was in January, was it not?
Yeah. And we invite you all to become members of the League so we can hear from you and what you care about and incorporate them into our positions.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. I have a question about the security of the system. When you mentioned that people were downloading games, is that a secured system that they were downloading these games into? would that open up an avenue for a professional hacker or someone to hack into this system?
Yes.
Does that...
That's why it's illegal.
It is illegal, is it? But it's been done, all right? It has been done.
Yes.
At any time that the system is involved in some sort of election or anything, are these downloads were in the system and then taken out?
Yes, as I say, we made them wipe the whole system, not just the one machine.
Yeah, but did you use the system when the games or whatever you said were downloaded into it? Was that system activated using it before you removed them?
Yes.
So would that would bring reproach upon the integrity of the election, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Can you speak to that further?
Well, that's why...
That's a big yes.
That's why it's a bad thing. That doesn't mean that the election was compromised, although the reason we found out about it was because they had a glitch in downloading the archives for the election. And then as we investigated the glitch wasn't caused by this, but we found out that this other unauthorized software was on the machine that was used for doing the ballot setup. And as I say, we not only required that unauthorized software be removed, we required that the entire voting system for the county be wiped clean and set up again from scratch, which, so in other words, take your laptop. You find that there was something downloaded on the laptop that you didn't want on the laptop, and you just delete it. Well, no, that's not what we did. We said you have to completely reformat and wipe clean that entire laptop. But not just the laptop. Every other thing that ever touched the laptop also has to be wiped clean and reformatted from scratch, which meant all of the every single voting machine used in that county.
At that time, when the machine's been compromised, shouldn't that trigger an audit of the election?
The answer is yes. But in that particular case, the results were not in doubt. That wasn't
what
the
particular
issue.
case was that? What particular case was that?
It was Rensselaer County a couple of years ago, and as I say, the reason it came out was because through an unrelated programming error, they were unable to download the results into the archive system. They had results, and the results had been audited, had gone through the 3% audit, but with some of the machines, they could not archive the results. And so in investigating, they found out that it gets very complicated, but that a mistake had been made in the pre-election setup in a way that prevented them from doing that. But coincidentally, as they were addressing that, they learned that there had been unauthorized software on the machines, and so the county was required to completely wipe everything and reformat all the voting machines and the computer used to do ballot setup in the county, which was an expensive and very time-consuming process, but we felt, the state board felt was their fault to begin with, and that nothing short of that would comply with our regulations.
Yeah, so these regulations exist on the state level, but it is up to the county boards to have good data health, have good practices in their boards, make sure that their employees, both the full-time employees that we have in the board and also the election inspectors, that they adhere to those security standards. So if the people who are coding the ballots, the voting system technicians, were to download gaming system onto the EMS, that would be a big problem for me as their boss. That is something that we bang into the staff members, and they go to trainings that the county provides on not clicking on phishing software, not clicking on anything that is from a questionable source, not accessing websites that have a weird domain name. They have to be able to have the internal knowledge to know where these red flags are. And these hackers are very sophisticated. They come up with very innovative ways to access the system. There have been other counties that have had, not in their Board of Elections area, but in other parts of their county, where they get a ransomware attack and the whole county system is compromised. It's down. They're asking for you to make a transfer to some unknown place through Bitcoin, and it's a problem. So it's not just your elections office that has to worry about those things. It's your whole county structure, and it's really important to have a very robust IS department or a computer department, and we do in this county. We have a pretty high-functioning IS department, so we're lucky. But some smaller counties, I worry for them. They don't have the budgets. They don't have full-time employees that are helping them out with all their technical components.
You're saying that Ulster County wasn't, didn't get hacked, or they didn't have any data on their database?
There's no evidence that we've ever been a victim of a
just
hacking attack.
Reassurances to that are the fact that it's not, when you sit down on these two computers that are isolated from the internet to program the ballots, it takes two people to do it. We have one Republican and one Democrat. So out of an office of 12, for two people to be doing that, it's going to be well known and well documented before it gets anywhere. And just to reiterate, we do a cybersecurity internet training once a year. I believe the state will actually be sending out the information in the next coming weeks for us to do this year's training. So everybody's responsible for going through that. It's just best practices for other ways that general computers and anybody themselves could potentially be exploited on their active working computer, whether it's through their email, websites that they visit, stuff like that. But to this specific scenario, in Ulster County, there's very limited ways for that to even possibly happen without the knowledge of more than two people. And that would bring about a bigger concern if that were to happen.
And direct physical access. It's our systems are not connected to the internet, so there's no one that can remotely access. They would need to have physical access to our.
John had mentioned earlier, Wi-Fi could open up that door.
No, just to clarify.
We don't use Wi-Fi in our networks.
The voting machines, the scanners, the DS200 that you feed your ballot in and that actually counts the ballot, those scanners cannot be hooked up to the internet. They cannot have Wi-Fi or modems on them. But the machines have to have input in order to count the ballots, in order to what's called the no, why am I blocking the word? To do the ballot setup. So for formatting, the ability to read the ballot and do the printout of the results at the end of the night. That is done by these two memory sticks that are put into the machines, okay? So, and they're standard USB sticks, okay? Those sticks have to be programmed, and New York State says that the machine that you use to program those memory sticks cannot be connected to the internet by Wi-Fi or any other means also, all right? So that's insulated from the internet. Now, when you do election night reporting, you take one of those sticks out of each machine and you put it into a different system that is hooked up to the internet. And as Ashley and John have indicated, they have to be concerned about the security of the election night reporting system. But those are unofficial results, but unofficial results can still make a difference, especially in the confidence of the election. And that's on the internet.
Who programs those? those sticks?
Well, that was what I said, that...
You put them into the machine, but someone has to program them, right?
Go ahead,
I
John.
mean, those sticks are reprogrammed through basically what is known as, trying to think of the term.
The election management system.
Yeah, but there's also a security standard known by the federal government where it's pretty much wiped, as in the case that Rensselaer had to wipe every computer. Basically, this little disk is wiped to a standard that is extremely high for national security purposes.
And it's 2 full-time Ulster County Board of Elections employees who program the election management software that builds the ballot. One is on my staff and one is on the Republican side. So just like how everything is in that bipartisan fashion, these are 2 full-time staff members. We don't contract them out, as Doug indicated earlier. We're not even allowed to do anything like that. So we have 2 full-time people that work all year long on managing and maintaining the voting systems and that software.
Thank you very much.
Hi, this is a great panel, thank you. Question maybe a little afield, but I'd be curious about your reactions. New York City is moving towards ranked choice voting for local elections, and I just wonder about your perspectives on that modality of voting. Does it create additional challenges, logistical and otherwise? Do you see it becoming more widespread in New York State and elsewhere?
Yes, I have supported going to ranked choice voting for many decades. I think it's a superior system. I might add that after World War II, when we were looking at how to bring democracy back to the occupied countries in Europe and in Japan, the Truman administration put together panels of experts on what would be the best systems of democracy, and that's why they got proportional voting and ranked choice voting in Japan and in Germany and Italy and in Israel, because that was the state of the art of democracy at the time. But of course, the old, in quotes, democracies, England, the United States, never changed their systems. So I think it's a much better system. But it does pose challenges. You have to educate the public on how to operate their balloting systems. In the case of New York City, they have to have a vendor develop the software for their machines, and that software has to be certified by the state. So I've been pushing them to get that going quickly. They still haven't done that yet, and they need to be prodded. But I'm very happy that they've adopted that system.
Just one wonky thing, and I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but it's complicated for auditing because instead of having a handful of ways you can vote for a contest, there might be hundreds or thousands or millions of ways you could vote for a contest. So that's a consideration, just to respond to that aspect of your question.
I have a question. That last step you said about the memory stick, that the last step goes through the internet. So what's the security plan for that?
Well,
so it won't change the...
So in Ulster County, the memory sticks are removed from the voting systems by the inspectors. They're placed into a security pack so that they can't be scrambled or tampered with in transport, either by election inspector personnel or by law enforcement. We have partnerships with them on election night. They come back and they get removed, they get checked in through the numbering system, and then they go into the memory card tower. That goes directly back into that air-gapped server. We do not, that is not connected to the internet. The way the results get transported to the website is through a fresh, never ever plugged into a computer ever, brand new out of the package, memory stick from the EMS to the computer that is connected to the internet, and it's a single use. It's never brought back into interacting with the election management software. So it's always completely air-gapped from the internet. Brand new sticks. would love to have sticks that are manufactured in the United States. There are not that many. So we do a diagnostic test before we use them to make sure that there's nothing on the stick itself from the manufacturer.
Just to clarify, are you saying there are 2 sticks from each voting machine?
Yes,
one
one
goes
stays
into the safe, separate thing,
security
and then the other one goes on for the same-day results that are uploaded on the
There's
computer?
3 different components. There's the 2 memory cards that are in the voting machine. One stays in there, does not come out. The other one does come out by the inspectors. That's how we get the election night results. Then there are the packages of, you can buy them at Staples, flash drives. And we use one at a time for every transfer to the wired computer that puts the results on our website and also transmits it up to the state for their reporting.
So even if what you're putting on for the, with the one memory stick online, so people can see if that's hacked, it doesn't matter. It matters, but it's not going to affect the ultimate results because that's on a separate system.
Correct. And on top of that, if that separate card that came back to us was ever in question, we still have one that's in the machine permanently.
With a tamper evident seal, a wire seal that if it's cut, we know it's cut.
Is the current equipment in the county capable of doing ranked choice voting?
I don't know. No.
I don't think so.
No. It would need new software. The short answer is no, but they wouldn't need to replace the hardware if they were to adopt ranked choice voting, but they would have to get new software that the vendor would prepare and would have to pass state certification standards.
Do we have more than one software provider trying to do ranked choice voting for us?
Right now, the answer is Ulster County uses the Dominion ImageCast precinct machines, and Dominion does have software that would work on those machines and could be modified at a cost of, it would probably cost about $500,000 or so to upgrade the Dominion ImageCast machines to work on a ranked choice voting system.
Statewide?
It's one set of software, once it passes the...
Just in case anyone else thought, wait, that's half their annual budget.
Any other questions? All right, well, we want to thank you so much. This has been... Thank you all for coming.